All right, Jeff, how are you doing? Thank you for joining us here on the Easy VC Brief. I don't know what, I think we're on episode 8 or 9 here, still early doors, but you are my second kind of founder CEO interview, and we're going real extremes here. We had Core Shell Technologies, a battery founder, and now we're moving into the CPG plant-based world. So a nice balancing act, but I just wanted to welcome you and thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Max. Pumped to be number 8 or number 9, whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. But Jeff and I met through his work at Daring, and I wanted to kind of tell that story today. I'm really excited to kind of have you on the pod. Obviously, Daring was recently sold, but also has just had a fascinating journey through COVID highs and COVID lows and fundraising and all these amazing experiences. For those who don't know Daring, I'm going to have Jeff just share a little bit about it. It's better coming from him than me, but maybe that's a good first intro. Why don't you just tell us, like, what is Daring? I mean, it's not a was. It's still in supermarkets. I think it's in 14,000 doors or something like that. So maybe tell us a little bit first about that, and then we can go into your story.
Sure. So Daring is a clean label plant-based chicken company. We're a nationally distributed brand, generally frozen within frozen distribution, sold at most of the big banners within the United States. So Walmart, Whole Foods, Wegmans, Target, H-E-B, Albertsons, Publix. So pretty good and robust distribution. Clean label is really what was the sort of the identity that allowed the business to effectively promote clean label in a much more differentiated way relative to much of the products that you see on shelf. And so that was the 2021 kind of benefit and catalyst to supporting a lot of our growth. If you look at a lot of the other competition, these are products that have 40, 50, 60 ingredients. And so high protein, clean label orientation is something that we really owned, and we did it primarily and solely in chicken for now. So we were lucky to finish in the middle of the year last year with an acquisition to V2 Foods out of Australia in conjunction with a minority investment from Ajinomoto, which is, to your point, how we met. So it's good to come full circle on that.
Yeah, we definitely are coming full circle here, and obviously now can talk a little bit more about this. But actually what I'm more interested in, and I think as an ex-entrepreneur founder myself, and I think a lot of people who listen to this pod, is really, Daring's interesting, but I'm actually much more interested in how you got introduced to that and really kind of, you're a wonderful example of someone who wasn't the founder, but got brought into the business early on and really had a rapid ascent, eventually becoming the CEO in April 2024. So maybe give us a little bit of history here on the call it the serendipitous beginnings of this introduction and how this all went.
Well, I'll take a little bit further step back. I'll give you a little bit more about my background, because I think it's important to understand, the skills that I developed and ultimately how that became something valuable to an early stage founder. I started in the investment banking world, so I was in sales and trading and went into the CPG group at Barclays, where I fell in love with the consumer. I then went on to a growth equity role up in Greenwich, Connecticut, at a fund called A&M Capital Opportunities. And it was then that I realized I was more excited about investing or working with the businesses that we invested in and trying to execute the strategic plan than necessarily just, sitting back and investing capital. And I had this lesson early on that one of my first bosses told me, and he said, if you don't know what you want to do, just build out your toolkit. And so I always figured if, the worst that could happen is I get my feet wet and operating, and then over time decide to maybe go back to investing, and that would only help me. Or I find operating really exciting, and sort of that's the path that I was fortunate enough to take. So I went on to Califia Farms at a little bit of a bigger business. It was 150 million at the time, and really worked on like a SEAL Team 6 style individual for the CEO and the CFO at the time.
What's Califia for those listening who might not be aware?
Califia is a plant-based beverage business predominantly known for their beautiful carafe bottles, yes, exactly. 48-ounce almond milk. They pioneered.
If you haven't had it, the almond milk is bomb. I mean, it is good. I definitely put it in my cereal.
Yeah, it's a great product, and there's a lot of parallels between what happened in the plant-based milk space relative to plant-based meats, which is ultimately where I, excuse me, I landed at Daring, and really a lot of the success is attributed to the premiumization of that category that Califia led, with a lot of similarities to Daring and what Daring did for premiumizing, I think, the plant-based meat space. But after my stint at Califia, I was cycling in Los Angeles. I met the founder of Daring in LA. We
Like
were,
really like on your cycle?
yeah, just through mutual friends. And, it was COVID. There wasn't a whole lot of team activities you could do, but you can get on a bike and, ride up a mountain. So that was, and you learn a lot about, other people when you're cycling. You learn a lot about endurance and getting to know people.
Do
And
you guys
so,
talk a lot on the bikes? Like when you ride next to each other, really?
yeah, you ever drive by like a peloton
Yeah,
of
correct. Are
yeah,
people actually talking to each other? I don't know anything about cycling.
when you're on PCH, you're not, but when you're in a little, you have a little bit more space,
Nice.
and not on the
Okay.
highway. It's a good chance to catch up with people and a beautiful scenery. And, if you're cycling 20, 30, 40, 50 miles, it's a long time on the saddle. So you get to have long chats. Um, but yeah, so I met him in 2020. I joined in the beginning of 21. And from there, really was just a teammate to help him build the business. I think I joined right after the Series A, before the Series B and C. We had raised over $100 million in kind of a 12-month period. And when you're going through such explosive growth, you need a lot of athletes, and I think that was a function of kind of my historical background. Was I had seen everything from the investor side. I had experience understanding the operational side of Califia. I had come from a finance background by trade. And so, athletes are really important for that early stage part of the business. And a lot of times I think those people can scale really well within the respective operating company. We can talk about team a little bit later, but you're always trying to understand, who's the best person to support us from point A to B. But then sometimes those people aren't the right people from B to C. And then when you're lucky, you get people from A to C and A to D, but that's certainly more rare. So a little bit more about my background and kind of joining early.
And so I mean when you think about kind of that process, even before we get into kind of the down market, let's talk about the highs. I mean, look, like you guys did, as you said, raised a boatload of capital. You grew the team extremely quickly. You grew distribution extremely quickly. I think what we've seen a lot is different discussions around how much you work on the product versus how much you work on distribution, how quickly you scale. I mean, any feedback or lessons learned from that experience that you want to share?
Yeah, it's a great question. We were lucky in that we felt like we had the best product in the world. And, iteration is really key in early stage businesses. You don't want to be too proud where you can't showcase, product to market to get feedback, but you also don't want to be, you want to be ready.
But the
I was
product you
speaking,
have today on shelf is pretty similar, like to that original chicken product, you would say?
there's been some further enhancements, but holistically, it's pretty darn close.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow, interesting. Okay.
right. And that's the constant tug and pull. There's a gentleman that there's a story about the gentleman that founded or came up with the Google Glass, those glasses, but I don't think it really made it to market and commercialized very well. But there's a story about that he asked where he basically is like, how long does it take to get to the first prototype? And a lot of people raise their hands and they say, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And his whole thing was, well, it actually took 10 minutes. You go into the closet, you take out the coat hanger, you unwire it, you put it on your face, you get feedback. And so it's always this constant tug and pull between iteration, getting feedback, but also making sure that you have a good experience past whatever threshold that feels right with consumers, because you generally get one chance when consumers are trying a new brand. So it's always you have to adapt where you feel the product is in terms of readiness relative to how fast you want to grow and the strategic plan of the business. If it's ready to go, you can take a variety of routes. You can start a little bit more focused, which I would say is probably the best approach. We had this saying called nail it and natural, scale it and conventional, not necessarily at Daring, but just within CPG more broadly. And I think for brands now, that's going to become much more of a focus rather than the 2010s where you saw a lot of big retailers like Walmart pretend to be a kind of thought leader in innovation, they're all regressing back to old school CPG. Scale the brand, nail the business and nail the brand in natural, develop a good consumer base, and then ultimately scale it in conventional if it is a premium brand. So it really depends on what you're trying to sell.
That's a good segue in general into kind of the decline that we've seen. What I call kind of selling down the market, where, obviously plant-based has been hurt. You don't need to follow the industry to know that. But that being said, some brands are what I would call stealing market share. I think Daring has managed to do that a little bit. But how do you think about that? How do you think, you helped lead that, right, before selling to kind of, not shrink, but improve your market and your performance position. How do you think about that?
It's a great question. It really depends on the category.
Yeah.
Because what the worst thing that can happen to a category is a free fall on price to try to generate, velocities and units on shelf. And when categories are challenged, generally that's what happens. Because, you've got excess inventory, you want to cycle it through. The big CPG brands may not care as much about their subcategory as obviously an independently owned business like Daring does, because they can maybe afford to take a little bit of price on maybe their, one of their brands. But for us, it could be catastrophic to the business. So there's a balancing act there again on price and maintaining a certain level of premiumization on shelf, but also making sure that you're not too far off from the rest of the pack. Just by being available, widely distributed at a price point that made sense for consumers, we were able to take a lot of share in a declining category. So that was just a function of us just being ready, knowing who we are. We didn't try to do too much too quickly. We stayed very true to that whole muscle
That's true, yeah.
texture.
And you stayed on chicken, as a key, unlock, I think, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So it's a
And
there's no perfect answer for any of this.
Do you think that helped really drive the interest and acquisition from V2 Food? Is this kind of hyper focus on a certain piece of the category?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of this is about where post acquisition, where is the growth opportunity, right? Can you expand within the existing chicken segment is obviously the first question. What else is missing from that in terms of format, taste, experience, that can deliver within chicken? But a lot of the underwriting comes down to the opportunity that's not been executed on. So, what other tangential areas beyond chicken should maybe, the V2 team focus on? And that's a big part of their upside through the brand's kind of proven track record, specifically within chicken. And then if you look at what V2's capability is from a technology perspective, they have had great proven expertise within non-chicken derived, plant proteins, which is a wonderful way to leverage those resources to execute in the U.S. market.
What do you, on that point, I've been seeing these like Beyond, I don't know even what it's called, Beyond energy drinks, and Impossible's trying to do, I think, high protein burger buns soon. How far can you really expand these brands?
Yeah, you're asking great questions. I think I'll answer two ways. Firstly, protein seems to be this theme of 24, 25, and now 26. There's protein water, there's protein. You breathe air and people say there's protein in it, which is both, good and bad. I think it's a little bit of a fad. I have a personal view on long-term protein, which is that it's not quantity of protein, but quality of protein will be the next layer that consumers focus on. So what is the complete amino acid profile of the protein itself? Soy is a wonderful, complete protein that delivers to consumers who are looking for non-animal derived protein. So I do think that's really important to highlight. But to answer your question beyond, pun intended, beyond the plant-based space, what you have generally seen is capital structure risk becoming more of a weight relative to the business risk itself, right? And so when you look at Beyond and Impossible, who have raised billions of dollars, neither of whom are profitable, then the business is now forced to have to just find other areas of growth in order to support continued valuations, validation from analysts and Wall Street, for Beyond specifically in the public markets. And so that it does feel like a little bit of a stretch to try to just find growth and find another avenue. But coming back to my earlier point around iteration, I respect brands that try things, especially when things aren't working. And there's
Yeah.
obviously idiosyncratic business challenges within both Beyond and Impossible, given they are still burning cash. So I respect
No,
that
I
they're
think that's a
trying.
great point. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people are quick to make assumptions, and I love that they still have that startup mentality. To your point at the beginning of the call around iteration, right? Like you gotta try new stuff, even if it fails. And maybe that's where this falls. But look, from that perspective, I mean, you just announced your departure from Daring, right?
Yeah.
So you have a new CEO coming in, and obviously you've built an incredible business. Um, but looking back on that journey to this point around, what can be done differently,
Yeah.
or do you have any kind of retrospective view of where things could have gone differently with Daring?
Yeah, we were one to go very quickly into Walmart very early, which
Oh,
it's
interesting.
interesting because Daring's two largest customers are Whole Foods and Walmart, which is generally not what you see within smaller CPG businesses. So I think looking back, really being a little bit more focused on distribution earlier to understanding price, because if you get too widely distributed too quickly and you don't know who you are on shelf as it relates to price, right? And price is not just the price pack of the unit, but also what is the price per ounce, premium or discount relative to what's trading and turning really well on shelf. And so looking back, I think being a little bit more patient on distribution could have been really helpful to save us some tough lessons in just, how much do we need to trade down to promote? Could we go a little bit more deeper with certain SKUs within retail, within fewer retailers first, rather than trying to scale too quickly with the same amount of SKUs? This is a very big country geographically, and frozen distribution is expensive. Refrigerated is more expensive, just given the shelf life constraints that you have. And so, the benefit of playing in fewer retailers is you're just sending more product in theory to the
Yeah.
same
You're
DCs.
potentially more profitable, right?
Correct. And the logistics cost per pound, as you look back to your P&L, hopefully becomes lower. And it can become an ugly part of the cost structure for most CPG brands, especially in low value to weight, high weight type business models, right? So Daring would be an example of that. The beverage space would be another
Yeah,
water is
beverage space
another.
killer, right? On the
It's
high
tough.
weight. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very tough. You need very high gross margins in order to support the overhead of these businesses to be profitable.
Well, I think hopefully as people listen to this, I think the last 30 seconds were some real nuggets of truth for any CPG founder. And I think a lot of people don't realize, like, what you're talking about there is an expansion of unit economics, right? It's not just the gross margin of your landed costs, it's also how you build your business, and that impacts kind of that second layer of gross margin, right? Which is logistics and trade fees, et cetera. But look, now that you're moving on as far as more of an advisor and board member in a variety of different businesses. I mean, maybe give us kind of a little bit of a key opportunities view. I mean, you mentioned protein a little, kind of the stages of protein, but maybe there's some other comments you might have. I mean, we have plenty of investors that also kind of are listening, so would love to hear how you see 2026 shaping up from an opportunity standpoint.
I'm taking some time before I pull trigger on, the next opportunity, just to be patient. It's been talk about the cycling metaphor earlier. It's been a 5-year climb, which is part of our, just being in the seat from small businesses to larger businesses to getting through the sale of the business and making contract manufacturing changes. So I'm really taking a step back to look at the universe and meet with people and until I feel tired. And then when I feel like the stars align and I'll be open to kind of pulling trigger and moving forward. But I'm thinking about this in sort of three buckets. The first is there an opportunity for me to maybe join another founder, an existing business that's either VC backed or even growth equity backed and help take that business from kind of similar size threshold, all the way through an acquisition, would be sort of the first. The second is, you're seeing a lot more of, I don't want to call it a search fund concept, but just, looking to see if maybe there's a business I could raise some capital on to go and acquire and be a
Yeah,
sort of a
love it.
partner in, an owner operator. I think about sort of the CPG world. I think about even the contract manufacturing world is really interesting. I'll come to AI in a second, but I think there'll be a lot of margin unlock from technology, which means hopefully more innovation can come with lower MOQs. So I think being at the forefront of, the supply chain gives you a ton of advantage without having to just be one brand, right? So there's a balancing act. Depends on the category for sure. And then the third is, I guess fourth would be I maybe start something, but third is really just I spend 2 to 3 hours a day in AI now. I mean, I am blown away by what I'm able to learn, what I'm able to do. I think it'll support smaller teams with more tools. Claude AI is remarkable. It's probably the most wonderful tool that I've come across yet. I had like a few aha moments, like, holy, I can't say shit, but I'll say it. Maybe you could bleep that out later. But it's just an amazing tool to really be, a complement to any C-suite. And so,
No, I agree.
yeah,
I mean, I'm seeing we're investing in CPG, right, as a venture capital investor, and we are seeing 4 and 5 person teams with 20, 30 million of revenue doing stuff where they might not need to even increase, team size much, right? Like it's fascinating, and especially the CPG world in America. To your point, right? Like it's a distribution game. If you can unlock the distribution and you can unlock, return customers because you have a great product, you don't need that many people, right, to manage that supply chain. If AI can help support it.
agreed. I
But
also think a lot of
yeah,
these tools, just to finish that thought, a lot of these tools are being built without the operational perspective of these CPG brands. And so I see maybe an opportunity as being that sort of intelligence to say, hey, let's build these tools because these are the real problems. And, generally the tech world, they just may never have spent time in kind of true
yeah, I love it.
CPG.
I love it. Um, well, good, man. Look, really appreciate you kind of with some of those nuggets there. Super insightful. Really, I enjoyed getting to know you and the team when we were going through this process, and just really thankful that you decided to join us here. And look, I look forward to seeing what's next.
Thanks, Max. Appreciate it.
All right, bud.